Hello everyone, this will be Chapter 20 of Regular Boy Daniel Wayne, written by Diamond Rosie and read by Insect Overlord. Damien's case had been going fine until he ran into a roadblock he could not overcome himself. After looking into the Fentons, Damien had done his research into the Anti-Ecto Act. Familiar with these types of cases from observing Father and the others, Damien was able to do much of the research without requiring any guidance. The acts on their own had been reason for much concern, deeming those with a traceable ecto signature subject to capture, detainment, and in some cases, to be used as research subjects. Damien had looked deeper into the GIW servers to find out exactly what their research entailed. In a word, it was harrowing. Statistically, most test subjects were not able to make it out responsive to their own terminology. Damien could not help but notice the peculiar terminology used in the reports. It went further than considering those with an ectoplasmic energy subhuman, as if they were not to be considered sentient or even alive. Damien may not be as proficient in bypassing firewalls as Oracle or Red Robin, but the information he was able to uncover was harrowing. Even his natural curiosity was repulsed by what more could be hidden behind the ones he had not managed to decode. To consider a subject not appropriate for public knowledge, while the ones that were deemed acceptable were already in such dire conditions, was a terrifying bar. The GIW's research was partnered closely with the Doctor's Fenton, though Daniel's association was to be determined. Considering he was still a student, he likely did not have the qualification to be welcomed into their research, but the Fentons themselves did not seem so rule-abiding when it came to their research, if their papers were anything to go by. In his search, Damien had found that, in the last 2 years, the Fentons were offered a position as researchers for the ectobiology division of Dalvco had recently funded. Then, roughly 6 months ago, construction began in the Caribbean for another research facility, despite the current one not producing enough funds to make it a reasonable business venture. The founder of Dalvco was Vladimir Masters, an alumni of the same PhD program as the Fentons, and their former research partner. Damien thought it was quite crass that he named his company the inversion of his moniker, Vlad. The association between the three was only made more suspicious by Masters sporadically running for mayor of Amity Park, when he had previously been residing in Wisconsin. Whatever scheme was underway, there was nothing Damien was able to find from his research online. The primary objective of the case was to bring legal attention to the anti-ecto laws, not uncover the strange relationship between Masters, the Fentons, and the GIW. If Damien's suspicions were correct, Daniel would pose some relevancy as well, though how was still undetermined. Painfully aware that his age would cause some hindrance in seeking out the case on his own, Damien thoroughly considered who he should partner with on this case. Richard was not an unfathomable choice, but his expertise did not lie in legal work. Todd was inconsiderable, as were Thomas and Kane, for a variety of reasons. Brown was an odd choice, and did not know her way around the law, as this case may require. That left his options Drake or Father. As much as it pained Damien to admit, Drake had a considerable amount of expertise dealing with the legal system, and may be able to bring light to this case despite his age. Of course, Damien could ask Father. With his public influence, the case would be over in a matter of weeks, if not days. But the consequence of that would be he would simply be handing it over to Father. It would not be a collaborative effort. Not that Damien wanted to collaborate, but he was not keen on the idea of relinquishing his credit to the case simply because Father had taken it up. If it were Drake, then Damien was confident he would still be regarded as the owner of the matter, if not publicly, then at least where it mattered. Damien's chair creaked as his weight shifted. The case had taken up much of Damien's free time, as well as his football practice. He had set aside time for his art projects, as he made a habit to always do, but the blindingly blank canvas that had sat on his easel untouched for the past week and a half seemed to only taunt him. Damien fiddled with the bristles of his brush. The water tinted his dark skin. It was still quite early in the day. He had planned to spend a substantial portion of it working on his art, but it seemed the universe was unwilling. Putting his supplies away, Damien opened his laptop to work on his case instead. From what Father and Richard had shared of their experience with the Fentons, it seemed they were quite chatty and quick to share information that should not otherwise be so easy to obtain. Not having met them himself, Damien was unsure how successful he would be in retrieving data that might be more personal. His objective was to first figure out if Daniel had been involved in their research practices and shared their ideologies. Perhaps it would be more convenient to confront Daniel himself, but Damien could not yet risk him being aware of the case. It was easy enough to find the website for the new facility the Doctor's Fentons were assigned to. Their profiles were conveniently on the home screen of the website, as well as their qualifications and contact information. Damien blinked at his screen, unable to believe the information he had thought would take him upwards of an hour to hack and retrieve was served to him. A little unnerved, Damien brought out his phone and dialed the number, testing his luck. The phone rang 2 times before there was a beep. "Hello, you've reached Dr. Madeline Fenton." Damien cleared his throat lightly. "Hello, Dr. Fenton. I am Damien Wayne. I'm calling to—" He was instantly cut off by a shrill voice. "Oh, Mr. Wayne is calling, sweetie. It looks like our grant is finally approved," Dr. Fenton said to someone else. Damien's brows knitted in confusion. Surely they had met Father multiple times in the 2 weeks he had stayed in their town. They ought to know the owner of Wayne Enterprises was Bruce Wayne, not his 13-year-old son, Damien Wayne. Furthermore, their association through being parents of Daniel should incline them to believe there could be other reasons for the Waynes to contact them. Dr. Fenton spoke through the phone again. "Mr. Wayne, if you don't mind me asking, what of our research papers proved to you that your investment would be in good hands?" "I am not calling about any research grants," Damien corrected. He waited for the doctor to say something. When the other line remained silent, he continued. "I was calling to inquire about your research practices." Damien hesitated at the proclamation, testing the waters with how blunt he could be. If they questioned him, he could use his age as a defense. "I see." Dr. Fenton nodded, her tone much more maintained now. "Well, go ahead." They hadn't questioned Damien's intentions, and did not even seem suspicious about it. "I've noticed that you've been working with Dalvco for 2 years now," he began, confident they wouldn't question how he was privy to this information. "That's correct." Damien could hear some shuffling through the phone. "You seem to have no other employer before that, but you and your husband seem to have many published research papers dating further than your current employer. How were you able to conduct your research without an employer?" Damien tried to add some authority to his voice, so they wouldn't disregard him from his age. There was a breath of silence before Dr. Fenton spoke up. "Oh, yes, we conducted our own research. We had a research facility in our basement. An at-home office of sorts." She laughed lightly at her own comparison. Her voice was distant and away from the phone, like she was indeed in something else. The light dismissal irked Damien, but he continued on. "You have 2 children who live with you during most of the time, correct?" She hummed affirmatively, obviously losing interest in the conversation. "Most of your research is done with various chemicals that could very potentially have lasting impacts on developing children." Damien recalled Daniel's medical file and his development of premature brachycardia. "Were your children involved in your research?" he asked finally. "Oh, well, we always made sure they had to take proper precautions, and of course, Jazz never went down there, even though we had plenty of hazmat suits made for her," Dr. Fenton explained graciously without getting mad. Damien waited for her to speak of Daniel, but his turn never seemed to come. So he prompted, "And your son, Daniel?" not able to stop his lips from twisting down in displeasure. "Oh, yes. Well, he did love to explore, and we couldn't keep him out for long." She sighed into the phone. "We always made sure he wore his equipment whenever he was cleaning or looking at stuff, so it was fine. Why do you ask?" Based on Dr. Fenton's tone, Daniel likely was not actively involved in the research, but having actually conversed with the woman who had raised father and mother's firstborn, he wondered what Daniel's upbringing had been like. Had their behavior simply turned dismissive after it was revealed Daniel was not their real son, or had it always been that way? "I was simply curious," Damien answered dryly. Dr. Fenton chuckled at that. "You're quite the charming fellow." She paused. "What did you say your name was again?" She was much closer to the phone than she had been the majority of the conversation. "Damien Wayne." "What a coincidence. That was Danny's dad's last name, too." Damien peered at the phone, like it had been the one to concoct that absurd statement. "Yes, that is my father," he managed to say, civilly. "You and Danny have the same father? Was this woman truly a researcher?" "Yes," Damien gritted out. "Oh." Dr. Fenton stretched the word in recognition. "For a moment, I thought you meant Wayne, like Wayne Enterprises." She laughed to herself. "Yes, I did. My father owns the company." Damien was not sure who was granting him this patience, but he was spending it at a rapid rate. "Danny's father owns Wayne Enterprises?" she repeated, surprised. How could she have not known this? Father had not hidden his identity when meeting them, and had even gone to the lengths to appease the Masons and Masters while he was there. If she, despite that, had truly not known who Father was, had not even made an effort to dull the mystery, effectively letting two unknown men take their son away, it had only gotten cleared up when Damien had called her. "Well, it was lovely talking to you. Tell your father to look into our research, Grant." Damien would do no such thing. "When you see him again." Without waiting for any confirmation on Damien's end, the call ended. "Ridiculous," Damien could not help but remark to the dark screen of his phone as he turned off the recording device. To conclude Damien's initial inquiry, Daniel had not been included in the research by the Fentons, but they hardly seemed to have a close enough rein on matters to make a trustworthy judgment. Luring that information from Daniel himself would require more finesse than he had needed with Dr. Fenton, lest he become suspicious of Damien. A knock at the door disrupted his thoughts. "Damie, Alfred says it's time for dinner." Daniel's voice filtered through the door. He had yet to stop calling Damien by that infantilizing nickname, despite his insistence. Damien huffed as he pushed himself off the bed and made his way to the door. "Daniel," he said venomously, looking up to meet his blue eyes. "Damie?" Daniel smiled pleasantly, not backing down. "Alfred's waiting." He gestured to the direction of the stairs. Brushing past him, Damien walked the familiar path to the dining room. He heard a light chuckle behind him as Daniel's footfalls echoed lightly behind his. Father was the only one in the dining room when they arrived, apart from Alfred, of course. "Looks like it's just us," Daniel commented quietly, electing to sit next to Damien instead of his usual seat further down the table, or Richard's empty seat on Father's other side. Damien frowned at Daniel as he took his next to him, as he would have if it were anyone else, but Damien found that he could not be repulsed by his presence, as he might have previously assumed. Not that he enjoyed Daniel sitting next to him. He would much prefer if he took his usual seat. It did not escape Damien that Daniel made a choice between him and Father, even if it were just seats at the dining table. Dinner went as usual. Father asked about their day and shared his own. The rule of not discussing cases at the dinner table had been implemented lengths further than before Daniel's arrival, much to Alfred's pleasure. With no one for Daniel to continue his usual chatter with, the table fell into silence. Alfred came around to dutifully collect their plates once they had finished their meals. Damien was about to take his leave when he noticed that Daniel had made no moves of leaving the dinner table yet. "What is it, Danny?" Father asked, eyebrows digging into each other as he faced the boy curiously. Daniel hesitated to speak, hands wringing nervously in his lap. Perhaps Damien had misinterpreted the source of his silence. Damien looked up to meet Father's eyes. I was just wondering if, He kneaded his lips together, trying to find the words. I'm listening, Father prompted softly. Damien watched curiously as Daniel firmed his shoulder. Well, since you said before that Damien and I have the same mother, Father took a breath, sensing where the conversation was headed, but maintained his face of open attentiveness. I mean, I haven't really seen much of her, I guess. Or she's not really around. Daniel tried hesitantly. I was just wondering, I guess, He finally trailed off, knowing Father had understood his sentiment. Mother's not dead, Damien said quickly, before Father could potentially sully her name in the lies he was about to concoct. Father looked at him in what Damien knew to be a silent warning. Yes, your mother is not dead, Danny. He laughed lightly, trying to brush off Damien's possibly insinuating tone. We simply... Father paused, trying to find the words. Don't see eye to eye on many things. Of course, we knew that before we got into a relationship, but, well, emotions are as blinding as they are fleeting. Damien frowned at that, but kept his silence as Father continued. Your mother lives in a different country, which is where Damien grew up before he moved in with us. It would be difficult for her to make the trek here and back repeatedly, as you can imagine. Father tried in a tone of sympathy. Daniel reminded Damien of their mother in the way that he studied Father, memorizing the mannerisms their opponents spoke and moved with. Damien could not understand why Father and Richard insisted on underestimating Daniel for his lack of formal training. It only served to show how much larger of a threat Daniel could pose. Damien needed to remain vigilant. Daniel nodded at Father's explanation and asked no further questions. Daniel always asked questions. It was the basis on which his disastrously budding relationship with Drake had been founded. But, unlike every lesson Father had given Damien in his time as Robin, he did not account for this, and remained blindly unaware of Daniel's potential suspicions on his explanation of Mother. Father excused himself to the cave not much later after dinner. His most recent case seemed to be providing him some grief, and he had implied that he would be conducting research instead of patrolling. For that reason, Damien had been the one assigned to divert Daniel's attention from the slew of absences in the manor, as well as make sure he did not put himself in harm's way. Father had left Damien and Daniel in the foyer as he made his way up the stairs to take the secondary entrance to the cave that Father had installed in his office. Daniel stood next to Damien, the suspicious silence from earlier still clinging to him. Deciding to take the initiative, Damien turned to Daniel. I challenge you to a rematch, he declared, chin tilted up to show his confidence. Daniel blinked at him owlishly. Rematch for what? He asked, confused. Damien had successfully distracted him from his thoughts concerning Mother. I will admit, the football match you challenged me to last time had not gone as leisurely as I may have anticipated. Damien crossed his arms over his chest, looking away. I have since reflected on the experience. Daniel could do without the information of Damien's training for the past 10 days. I would like to challenge you, formally, to a rematch. The side of Daniel's lip curled up in an expression that would have been self-satisfaction if it had not been betrayed by the look in his eyes, almost akin to excitement. Of course, that couldn't be right. Daniel was a threat to Damien's position in the family as much as Damien was to Daniel. Perhaps Damien could not challenge him to a duel like he could with Father's other potential heirs, but he would still prove his superiority to Daniel while maintaining the guidelines of the mission. You think you can beat me, huh? Daniel questioned challengingly, the smile not leaving his face. I know I can, Damien insisted. Daniel laughed in response. Damien did not sense any mocking in his tone, so he decided to let it pass. I'll go grab the ball, he said, heading to the stairs. That won't be necessary, Damien interjected. "I've already prepared beforehand. Setting up the battlegrounds, when possible, was one of the best advantages one could have over their opponent." Daniel seemed to take it in stride. "Lead the way, boss." He stood at attention with a mock salute. Damien scoffed at the show, lips threatening to tilt upward. How insolent. True to his word, Daniel followed a few paces behind Damien, while Damien retrieved the equipment from where he kept it. Despite the coming winter, the sun still provided sufficient light to see the surroundings, despite the incoming clouds. "I've considered the perimeters of our duel," Damien began, letting the ball drop to the ground before his feet. Daniel nodded attentively. "Since it will be only us, we can conduct a one-on-one match following the regular rules of the sport. I trust you're already familiar with them. I've set up goals for us beforehand, and the first to 5 points will be deemed the victor. Any objections?" "Nope," Daniel grinned. The duel was a challenging one for Damien, indeed. Despite all his practice and training beforehand, there was still a clear disparity in their skill. Daniel was faster than Damien, and his perception with the ball was much more advanced. A marker of his time and dedication to the sport, no doubt. Nevertheless, Damien kept his eyes glued to the ball, following Daniel's foot movements and pacing, evenly enough to keep up. Despite Damien having the ball in the beginning, Daniel had been quick to swipe it between his feet when Damien had kicked it out of his reach. It had taken Damien some time before he had been able to regain the object from Daniel, but he fared much better than the first time they had competed. Careful not to repeat his mistake from earlier, Damien dribbled the ball between his feet while blocking Daniel from stealing it again. The net clear in front of him was unobstructed, and Damien took the shot. The black and white blur of the ball spun into the back portion of the net, making Damien's first point on Daniel and the first point of the match. Watching his victory, pride flooded through Damien. The sprint both sons had been locked in slowed into a light jog at the point both stopped a few feet from the net. Damien turned to Daniel as they both caught their breath, intent on declaring his superiority in the skill, but Damien spoke before he could. "That was amazing, Damien. Good job." The jeer on Damien's tongue died at those words. "Tch." He turned away from the older boy and his happy smile, despite his loss, to retrieve the ball. Before he had made it to the net, a bright flash went off, blinding Damien. Alarmed, Damien turned to it, only to find Alfred with a small camera in hands. A pleased smile was on his face as he examined his handiwork. "Pennyworth," Damien acknowledged, intending an explanation. "Master Bruce asked that I keep an eye on you two, lest you engage in anything less than safe. I am simply gathering proof that he need not be worried. I'm sure the young masters will understand." There was a mischievous twinkle in the butler's eye as he spoke, and Damien suspected that his explanation might not be entirely truthful. "I want to see," Daniel proclaimed. The curious look on his face seemed to have infected Damien as well. Alfred handed the camera to Daniel without fuss, who held it low enough for Damien to be easily able to view the picture. It captured the scene right after Daniel congratulated Damien on his score, both of them standing close, hair tousled in their movements. Damien had not realized he had been smiling. "We do not have time for a photo shoot, Alfred. This is a serious battle," Damien proclaimed as he turned away from the camera and headed to retrieve the ball. "Of course, young Master Damien. I apologize for the intrusion. Would you like me to return with drinks?" Damien's ear burned at the teasing tone in the butler's voice. "Do as you wish." "I will return shortly, then." He turned to head back inside the manor. The duel was reignited when Daniel's foot moved to steal the ball from Damien again. This time, Damien managed to deflect the attack, trying to shoot for another score. Daniel was quick to block the ball before it made it to the net, redirecting it to his own point. The duel was cut short when the rain began pouring quite heavily. Thunder had threatened the sky earlier, and it hadn't been completely unexpected. Regardless, Damien couldn't help but be disappointed at their unfinished battle. "I had 4 points, and you only had 2, but since neither of us were able to meet the requirements of victory, I suppose it shall be concluded in a draw," Damien proclaimed as Alfred shut the door behind them. the sound of the storm being muted behind the barrier. "Well, you clearly had more points than me, so that means you win, even if we weren't able to get to 5, Daniel offered, taking a sip of his apple juice. Damien considered the words over his own glass of milk. "That would be dishonorable," he explained, meeting the blue eyes of his rival. "We will simply need to duel under a more welcoming environment." Daniel seemed surprised by Damien's answer, but it melted into a much softer expression. "It was an honor to duel with you, Damie." Damien looked away at the words. It was still quite early in the night, and it would be irresponsible of him to leave Daniel unattended. Damien had a mission to accomplish, after all. Pushing aside any personal reservation he may have had, Damien was not yet ready to admit that there had been no reservation. "We could continue another way. The media room should be empty during this time. There are many online games to choose from." "A video game challenge, huh?" Daniel considered tentatively. Damien's stomach churned at the potential of being turned down, but he kept his face neutral. "I'm pretty good at video games, so it might not be easy for you to win," he said confidently. Damien peered at him. "Let's see how that claim holds up under scrutiny." He smirked, making his way to the media room. Damien grabbed 2 controllers from the drawer before Daniel made his way to the room. "Here." Damien absent-mindedly handed the boy the red and black controller with Robin's signature R etched on the top center of it, taking the Batman one for himself. Daniel blinked at the controller, owlishly. "Did you mean to give me the other one?" he asked after a while, making a gesture to display the colors of the controller to Damien. "Do not do Robin a disservice with a miserable loss," Damien huffed instead of answering. Daniel looked at Damien for a long moment. "Since you were in the lead for the soccer match, why don't you pick the game?" he finally said. The screen displayed Damien's 3rd win, making their decisive duel a tie. The animation danced on the screen as Damien finally declared he was bored of the game. "Do you want to pick a different one?" Daniel offered placatingly. "No," Damien sighed, not making any movement to leave despite the excuse of needing to go to bed, easily applicable given the time. "Daniel," Damien called quietly. "Yes?" His hair scratched against the leather of the couch to face Damien. Damien braced himself. "Are you aware of the Anti-Ecto Act?" If Daniel had been surprised by the question, he didn't show it. "Yeah," he admitted, waiting for Damien to elaborate. "What do you think of them?" Damien tried to ask innocently, as if he had only come across the term and did not spend hours researching them. Damien's expression lacked the usual ease and warmth Damien had grown used to seeing when he spoke. "They're just a way for the government to excuse their research on non-human creatures. It deems anyone with an ectosignature non-sapient, which is ridiculous because every living thing has one. Just because they're not traceable doesn't mean it's not there." How would Daniel have known that? They're in direct opposition of the Meta Rights Act that was passed a few years before them, a workaround for people who know where to look. Disdain was obvious in his words. "I looked into the Fentons," Damien found himself admitting. "They didn't have the same reservations as you on the matter." "They don't." Daniel's voice was quiet. "They had a research lab in your basement," Damien said, not sure why the conversation suddenly turned so directionless on his part. Daniel just nodded, knowing Damien understood the implications. Daniel refused to look at Damien when he admitted it, and the slight frown on his lips and the sadness in his eyes made it clear to Damien that the attitude that the woman who claimed to be Daniel's mother seemed to have on the phone with Damien had not been reserved for strangers who had interrogated them on their work. Despite the confirmation that Daniel had not been directly involved in their research, an annoyed irritation swam in Daniel's chest at the new realization. He would have to share his findings with Drake by the morning. When Damien finally returned to his room, he had no intention of sleeping despite what he may have told Daniel. The case could not be furthered much more on his own, so Damien was forced to wait until Drake returned from patrol to not raise suspicions from the others. Aimlessly sitting on his bed, Damien's attention was caught by the blindingly white canvas in the portion of his room he dedicated to his artistry. The picture Alfred had taken came to his mind. Paint and charcoal marred the version of the image in Daniel's mind. The football nets buried behind bushes of pink camellia and daylilies, with the point Damien had scored still sitting in his side of the net. "That was amazing, Damien. Good job." Sleep did not seem keen to welcome him, but the canvas beckoned for his attention. The next morning provided the perfect opportunity for Damien to enlist Drake into his case. It was no secret that Daniel and Drake tended to spend many hours of their free time together, but when the ex-Robin entered the dining room for breakfast alone, Damien knew it was his best opportunity. Alfred had easily explained that Daniel had prior arrangements that morning and would not be returning until afternoon. Pennyworth was not keen to explain what the prior arrangements were, despite Drake's questioning. It seemed Daniel had not responded to the calls or text he had been sent either. Damien slowed his eating pace so he and Drake would finish their meals at a similar time, despite his earlier start. It took Drake to be halfway up the stairs to notice what Damien had been shadowing him. "What do you want, brat?" he asked with annoyance. Damien clicked his tongue in irritation. "I've noticed Daniel's absence from the burden of your presence." "You heard Alfred. He had somewhere to be." Drake frowned at him, using the added height of the stairs to look down on Damien. "You can ask when he gets back if it's bothering you so much." Drake glanced back to his phone, likely to check if Daniel had responded to his attempted communication yet. "Daniel is capable enough to handle himself. He does not require you as his proxy." Damien crossed his arms in indignation. This was proving to be more difficult and humbling than Damien had intended for. Drake raised an expectant eyebrow at him, but did not refute Damien's statement. With no one nearby, "I would," Damien grit his teeth, "like to request your assistance on a case I am working on." Drake blinked at him in surprise. "You want me to help you?" Suspicion heavy in his tone. "Why not Dick or Bruce?" Did he truly have to spell it out for him? "You have the most applicable expertise on the matter," Damien admitted, annoyed. Drake tilted his head in shock, amusement playing at his lips at Damien's words. "What's the case about?" "It's only a need-to-know basis. You must agree to my conditions first." "Yeah, whatever, Brad. I'll help you if you need me to." "I do not need your help," Damien balked. How dare he assume as such? "I could do it on my own, if I so desired," he lied. Drake waved his hand flippantly in the air, as if shooing away Damien's words. "Tell me what the case is," he pressed with a laugh. "I'll work it with you." Their work continued with minimal arguing, in comparison to their regular amount, until Father had summoned them all for an emergency meeting. It seemed he had finally managed a breakthrough on his case and required their assistance to neutralize a new threat. Alfred had informed them that Daniel was due to return any moment, so Father had made their meeting point one of the manor's lesser-used rooms instead of the cave, as was protocol. Everything had been going to plan, until footsteps approached their meeting place with a vigor Damien had never known Pennyworth to possess. A silence draped the room as Daniel came into view of the doorway, excitement ready to spill from every ounce of his presence. No sooner had the room registered his presence than it all seemed to evaporate from him, and a much more restrained smile was pushed onto his face. Daniel's eyes flashed in Todd's direction for a moment, before he spoke with an artificial cheer. "Have you guys seen Alfred?" Whatever contents had been in his hand was deposited smoothly into his back pocket. "I believe he said he would be tending to the garden," Father said unapologetically dismissively. The room remained silent. "Oh, yeah." His footsteps were paced faster than normal, but the anticipation that had weighed them earlier was notably absent. Damien felt uncomfortable in the plush chair he had chosen as Father continued the briefing. "You know, it's only a matter of time. He's not stupid." Todd spoke when no one made any movements to leave the room once Father had finished. "He found out Clark was a meta before we even got to his office. I wouldn't be surprised if he's already on to us." Todd pushed himself off the wall he had been leaning on for the majority of the meeting. He knows Clark is Superman? Father's eyes widened in shock. Damian did not find himself empathizing with Father's surprise. Annoyance resonated in Todd's words. Seriously? That's your takeaway? He crossed his arms with a glare. He found out Clark has super hearing because someone forgot to tell Boy Scout that Danny has a slightly irregular heart rate. You're making a mistake underestimating him, Father, Damian finally added, remembering the conversation the three shared about Mother the day before. The words spilled from Damian before he was able to ponder on them. He may be your son, but do not forget that Daniel is also my brother. Todd is right. It is only a matter of time. The weight of the wide-eyed stares his statement had earned made Damian's ears burn and his stomach churn with a feeling not unlike nausea. He's not going to find out, guys. Richard was quick to ease the rising tension in the room. And besides, it's for his own good. We talked about this. Todd scoffed. Whatever, I'm out. He left, having had enough of this conversation. For his good? Drake stood as well. Or yours. He sent a heated look in Richard and Father's direction. The meeting was adjourned without the air of confidence they often shared before their missions. This concludes Chapter 20 of Regular Boy Daniel Wayne. I hope you guys liked this. I thought it was so sweet how Danny let Damian win, I'm pretty sure, and how he was like, it's okay, you can win, and let him choose the games and stuff. That just seems so sweet. Sorry for the long wait and irregular posting. I'm probably going to still be posting irregularly because I have just a lot of stuff I'm supposed to be doing. So yeah, that's it for now. The next chapter, I don't know when it will be up, but anyways, thank you so much for listening.